Rima Fadlala here, proud daughter of Dearborn, professional love letter, and avid vibe capitalist. And today we have the pleasure of speaking to someone very, very, very near and dear to my heart. Jean Joseph, original Dearborn girl, nobody else can claim that. Hajje, and also known in Arabic as Jamile. Jean, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
So we want to cut to your Dearborn girl story. Yours is, so you're the original DG. And we want to hear about what it was like being a Dearborn girl when people didn't really even know what that meant.
Okay. Well, let's hope I don't disappoint anybody.
No, you will not. Of course not.
Yeah, I'm going to start off with my age, so if I screw up, you'll excuse me.
Jean has the sharpest memory of anyone in my age group, so when she says things like that, it's just absolutely not true.
So I'm 75 years old. I was born in 1944. And when I was born, my parents had already left the South End and bought a home on Curtis Street in Dearborn back in 1942. And I was born in 44, so they were there about 2 years before I was born. They paid $6,000 for that home.
Wow.
So anyway, growing up in that neighborhood, it was the ethnicity of the people in the neighborhood. We had Germans, we had Polish, we had Italian. It was a mixture, but nobody cared back then what you were. And although we are Lebanese, Arab, Arabic, people didn't use that term. I didn't even know about such a term. We were called Syrian. Everybody referred to us as Syrian. Even there's some poems for Khalil Gibran, the Lebanese poet, who in the term, he would even use the word, he welcomes Syrians to America, which we know that he was referring to the Lebanese. So our neighbors didn't look at us differently. And my mother back then just covered her hair lightly, so there was no distinction for anybody to wonder, about our religion. And nobody knew anything about our religion. That was the only hard, difficult times that I remember having. I started school, okay? Let me try to explain this. Back then, there was so much honesty that nobody questioned anything. If you wanted to go to school or fill out an application, get a driver's license, social security card, you just went in and filled the application. Everybody knew you were honest. Nobody lied. So because my mother was illiterate, okay, she had fouled up, and anyhow, I didn't find out till I was 9 years old. I ended up going to school 1 year before my time. She had thought I was born in 1943. And so I was struggling in school only truly because I was younger than I should have been. And because of that, they put me in speech class, which I stayed the whole elementary years. But the difficulty that nobody was familiar with our religion. Nobody was familiar with anything besides Syrian. It wasn't on the map. I mean, just Syrian, Lebanon wasn't even on the map. So some of the problems that I had was when religion would come up. The Korean War was going on in 1950. So they wanted to do a blood type on all the children, and they would teach us for air raids and stuff. And when they were doing the blood type, they wanted our religion. And I'm in line there, and I'm terrified. I don't think I was more than, if I was born in 44, probably 6 years old, 5 years old. And I was asking the kids around, what are your religion? Most of them were Catholic, Protestant, Christian. So I didn't know what to say, so
Were you aware that you were Muslim at the time?
Yeah, I was aware of Muslim. I was aware about the Prophet Muhammad. I always wore a mashallah Quran around my neck. I always had faith in Allah, and I always used it. But when you tried to explain, people who didn't know anything would refer to as Muhammadism. They wouldn't refer. They called it. They thought we worshipped Muhammad.
I feel like that would be really hard for them to say.
So it was kind of disappointing for me, and I couldn't express myself. I wasn't old enough or comprehended enough to, and I don't really know what to end up putting down on my papers. I just remember that my older sister kind of bashing me because when the papers come to the house, she said, "Are you stupid? What you put down for your religion?" I says, "Well, what did they put? I didn't know what they put, So anyway, I think it was
so
Protestant or something,
So you didn't, people weren't talking about it actively, but you still felt kind of ashamed of it because other people couldn't relate to you.
Yeah, because being in line, and it was a long line, talking to all the children and friends and that, nobody was of that religion. I mean, most of them, either they were Protestant or Christian, which it all belonged to the Christian faith, if I'm not mistaken, anyway, regardless. And I found nobody like me or anything. And because the folks spoke Arabic at home, I had a tendency to start thinking in both languages, and some words I didn't know in English to comprehend, to express myself. So those were things that made things difficult. At lunchtime, my mother used to make us lunch, but every now and then she was busy and told us just to buy lunch. And sometimes they didn't have menus like today, and they would have pork. I don't know how I knew it was pork. Somehow, some way, alhamdulillah, it seemed I always was able to pick up if something was pork from the smell or something. But we had a sandwich. I think it was a spread of some type of a ground ham or something. And I told the lady I wasn't going to eat it. Well, then you're not going outside. You're going to sit at you eat your lunch. And I'm not going to eat it. And I sat there. We used to have our lunch break. I sat there the whole hour, and she was going to force me to eat the sandwich.
Wow.
But I didn't eat it. I wasn't going to go against, the religion, because I knew we don't eat pork. In fact, back then, if you didn't go to the farm or bring the meat, the live, was there a chicken or a lamb or whatever, and slaughtered it yourself, you didn't have halal.
Wow.
There was no halal. There was no halal butcher stores or anything. Nobody even processed it. So every now and then, my dad maybe get chickens and do it in the backyard, which, was illegal. and then he had a grocery store, and sometimes if they got a lamb or something, they do it in the back room. And
I'm laughing because our neighbors, I don't know if you remember this, but the people who lived across the street from us,
they would do it.
Yeah, they had a whole farm in their back. They were Arab. And so I just thought it was funny. But
yeah, they do because everybody gets upset.
Well, nobody was going to tell on them because everyone in our neighborhood was Arab at this point. So at your time, you were saying that, so you were a minority within a minority, and people weren't aware of what Arab meant. Exactly. So how was it being Arab in America at that time? Did you still feel as though, even though people weren't identifying you as an Arab, there was still some sort of hatred towards immigrants or xenophobia?
There was prejudice, and to be honest with you, I felt myself being prejudiced because they talked nothing about World War I and World War II, and about the Germans and about the Nazis. And then people across the street were the nicest people you want to meet, but they were German. And people back then, it's not like today. People don't sometimes mention what are you, but back then everybody was aware of what you were. So I found myself, they're German. That's a bad thing, because I was just a child. I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
And then we had a new neighbor move in on the one side. Before we had some Greek people there, were very nice. But some other people moved there, and I don't know what she was, to be honest with you, but she was prejudiced because she knew we were Arab. So where she came from that she knew, I didn't know, but she was being very nasty to us, And growing up, I mean, as far as the put it this way, political wise, there was prejudice because back then we were only known as Syrians. Okay, so in the Middle East, off and on, there would be some turmoil going on over land or something. The problem with Palestine and Israel and that, and threats coming from a lot of the Arab nations. So in 1950, I recall that back then people read the newspaper, not like today, nobody reads newspapers, but we had a copy of the Detroit News, and there was a map in the paper, and one of the family members was reading it. And anyway, I was curious, so I looked at the map, and what I saw there was a map of the Middle East, and there was a couple of captions, and one caption said that these people all spoke the Arabic language, but also it said that if they ever got together, you better watch out. And those aren't exactly verbatim what it said, but the intent was that if they ever band together, that we would have a problem. But then below it, another caption was sarcastic, being sarcastic, maskhara, that if they, but don't worry about it, they never will. Mm-hmm. And being a young child, I don't know what it was, but I was too young, but somehow it just burned inside of me. It really, really upset me, because I looked at that why are they being sarcastic towards us? Why is it that they don't think that our people are trustworthy? You know,
I think the part that bothers me even more than that is the sarcasm around the fact that we never will band together, when that's very much so in a lot of ways America's doing, you know, the reasons that we can't band together as a community.
Yes.
But you're saying something really interesting, because you're talking, and I know you identify very strongly with being both Arab and American. When you were speaking about the people who wrote that, or the people who feel that, you said they, and then when you were talking about the Arab world, you said us. So knowing that you were born and raised in the States, how did it feel still having that duality, knowing that you were very Arab? What did that look like for you, and how is that different than maybe what it looks like for us or what it looked like for our parents?
Well, because I was born in a time, in a world where there wasn't enough people from our community, especially where I lived in East Dearborn. So I didn't have any of that camaraderie. So I think that I gained more of a loyalty to, say, the American way, because in school every day, we were considered a Christian country, whether we liked it or not. Yeah. And every day now they took the religion out of schools, but back then, every morning you'd have put your hands together and you'd have to pray.
Wow.
They didn't use the term, only term they used was God. They didn't use any other term, so it wasn't really derogatory or anything that offensive. But and then also we did the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. So in a way, we were kind of being, I look at it now as an adult, being brainwashed that this is your country. Whatever they say goes. You follow their beliefs. You follow everything. And then when you begin to become older and you start to think, then you realize, and you get a rude awakening, all these cowboy movies that we saw, that the Indians are always the bad guys. All the movies you see where they had, in Africa, the Arabs were the guys on the camels being the bad guys. You begin to wonder, what are we as Americans? What do we got to be proud of?
Wow.
You know, I start thinking about silly things maybe that and we were doing, in 5th grade, we were doing history and that, about the explorers and stuff, and about the Minutemen, and then we talked about the, what do you call it, the Boston Tea Party, okay? And the Boston Tea Party, what was it? And people just think of it, well, they dressed up as Indians, the patriots, whatever you want to call them, and the colonists, and they dressed up as Indians and went on the ship and then dumped over the tea because they didn't want to pay the taxes to King George of England. But if you think about that, the deception, this country is being deceitful before it even became a state. I mean, a country, before it was even the United States. It was still colonial people running it, and they literally were putting the blame on another people.
Wow.
And so deception has been going on in this country. So we killed off the Indians. How many things did we do in the name of, what do you want to call it?
Patriotism.
Yeah, patriotism,
Yeah.
and it's not.
Wow.
You know, it's sad. Not to jump off to another thing, but in 2006, when Israel went into Lebanon and did that destruction to all the infrastructure, this is the first time in my life as an American Arab that I felt the pain, I felt the hurt, I felt the betrayal, I felt the hatred, the one-sidedness of our government. They're really not fair. They're not looking for right from wrong. They're looking whatever suits them, whatever suits their pockets, whatever.
Yeah. No, it's before you mentioned 2006, I was going to tell you that the way you describe your education and being brainwashed and indoctrinated, some people will argue with me about this, but nothing has changed. And I think if anyone has an argument to that, my counter argument would be that they've just disguised so we don't pray in the morning. And I honestly don't, that's not even an issue to me. I think the Pledge of Allegiance and those kinds of normalization around being American and finding ways to subtly silence our culture, even at the point where I was at Fortson High School and it's 95+% Arab and Muslim, the way that they were indoctrinated. I mean, we used to start one of my classes, Jeannie, every morning for 15 minutes watching Fox News. And when I think about that now as an adult, it blows my mind. You know, it's like, to me, that's a bigger crime than breaching separation of church and state.
Exactly.
So it's so interesting to me the way that things don't really change. Is that something you've noticed, even just culturally in the community?
Nothing really has changed. Only thing is maybe becoming more aware of it. Maybe as, like myself personally, as I mature, in seventh grade, I had gone to Lebanon twice in 55. Actually, more than that, but by this time period in 55, and actually one time back, the story is coming from 1955, and they had pictures of Jamal Abdel Nasser all over Lebanon. Mm-hmm. Everybody loved him, and he was a hero. And when you know the things that he did, you know that he was a hero. But then, in 7th grade, we had a history teacher, social studies. We were studying Egypt, and she kept referring to him as a dictator, kept referring to him not as a president, being very insulting. And I would debate her and argue with her. I know that she took a very bad disliking to me because I wouldn't back off. Mm-hmm. And she wanted me to, when I was reading, instead of just reading, like it said that Jamal Abdel Nasser was the president of Egypt, she wanted me to put in there that he was a dictator. And I wouldn't do it. Wow. I said, he's not a dictator. He's good for his country. In 1956, I was in, I think it was sixth grade, and that's when Egypt wanted the Suez Canal. The Canal of Suez belonged to England, even though when Egypt got its independence from England, they didn't give them the canal. Egypt wanted the canal. It's theirs. And even in school, I remember kids like myself, we didn't know any better. We just thinking about fair is fair. Well, it's theirs. Why can't they have it? Even the kids in the class, because we were doing a debate on it. And everyone did agree that if it's in their country, then they should own it. Why should England own it? So I think the generation I came from, even to this day, have kind of matured and changed their attitude towards a lot of the unfairness that goes on in this country, you know. And then the younger generation, like yourselves, you see it more because in that civil war that took place in Lebanon, 74, 75, it brought so many immigrants to this country, especially from Lebanon, that in my day, if your folks were worried about who you're going to marry, if they didn't plan for you to marry somebody, you could end up like most of the people did, marry an American person. But nowadays, you don't worry about it because if you go into any school, come up like to the future now, in 1993, I was in Oakman School, and they had these on the wall when they remodeled the thing, ceramic tiles, little ceramic 4x4s on the wall, and they had children's names on them. And I'm looking at them, Ahmad and Ali and Ibrahim and Imad. And I'm looking, and I said to somebody next to me who was American, I says, where's Johnny and Bill and Joe and William?
I feel the opposite when I look at the forts and you know those things that they have up in the forts and hallways, and it's just like super white. And I'm like, wow, look at us.
Yeah. So I says, we've come a long way. We have. And then when the schools had like 95% Arabic children in them, They were only saying 50%. They didn't even, administration didn't even want to admit it.
See that?
They had that many. You could go into every classroom. You're lucky if you found one American.
Exactly.
And if you did, they weren't 100%. Either the mother was out of it or the father was out of it.
Yeah.
So it was very cute. And then and like my children, if you were to talk to my children now I know they're sorry, they wish they knew Arabic, you would say, what's wrong with you? I listened to nothing but Arabic music all my life since the time I was this high. That was it. I did not listen to American music. It's always Arabic music. And anyway, so growing up, I spoke to the kids Arabic, but there was nobody else speaking Arabic.
Yeah.
All right, so they didn't learn it. So other people, as children learn Arabic, they would say, oh, ya sabah al-sham, how come your kids don't know Arabic? I tell them, wait a minute. Think for a minute. Your kids, before they went to Fortson, didn't even speak Arabic. But when they got over to Fortson, there were so many Arabic kids there. Ghasban annon, against their own will, they learned the language. They didn't learn it because they wanted. They learned it because they knew that it was something that they could use, because the teachers in the beginning were not Arabic like nowadays. They were American.
Some of those teachers learned out of it.
Because of the children.
They know when we would say things about them. One thing that's interesting about our experience, because I agree, it's really cute, and it's one of my favorite things about my upbringing, is that during the years where I could have been very insecure about my identity, I was nurtured by the fact that my peers understood me. But one of the things that's really upsetting is that in those schools, you're still made to feel like little moments like the one that you talked about, where you're reading and she's trying to literally force you to talk about this man in a way that you don't agree with politically. Even though those politics are thousands of miles away and they seem out of touch, that's our identity. And when schools aren't honoring that, and when you see like your teacher showing Fox News, or even when Fortson was predominantly Arab, I know for a fact that made me feel like I should hate something about myself, even though I didn't, and even though I came from parents who never taught me that. Deep inside, I was so hyper aware of the fact that, okay, well, these people hate me. So I think a lot of people in my generation actually are very skeptical about what it means to be American. I think we claim certain parts of it, but other part we just feel so rejected by it. And so we're talking about how things haven't changed much, and I want you to speak to the ways in which it has changed. So like when you look at my generation, you could be honest, you're not going to hurt anyone's feelings, but like looking at my generation or looking at the kids growing up under us right now, what are the big trends that you're noticing specifically in Dearborn that have changed for the positive, neutral, negative?
Well, I don't know if this is really pertaining to what you're saying, but one thing that I've noticed, I've been proud of the fact that I noticed that your generation is so in touch with your folks' feelings, with your folks' political views, as far as Lebanon, the things that take place. If you are listening to the news, you know it all. You know that if they're lying. The other day about when Israel actually went into Lebanon, or they shot into Lebanon. You didn't hear nothing on the news about it.
Of course not.
What you were hearing is when Lebanon retaliated.
Exactly.
And you're waiting for the end there.
But
was this a retaliation, So finally, I think it was on MSNBC the other night, he told the whole story, and I'm waiting. Finally, at the end, it's like somebody must have nudged him or something. And he says that this was all done in retaliation for the strike from Israel first. So
under his breath. I had to search so hard. I was sitting in my living room, and I had to search so hard to find the actual article of what happened. And you're right. I think our age group, just by being able to grow up, I walk down the stairs, Baba's listening to NBN or LBC or Al Jazeera. And so to me, what that communicated subconsciously is that there's another side to the story. And I think growing up, just constantly being aware that the side that America is showing you, or anyone's showing you for that matter, is not necessarily the truth. And it's on us to seek out, among all of these different stories, what's the truth. So one thing I want to ask you, I know you very well, obviously, your family. And one thing that I've always admired so much about you is your ability to reflect and be introspective. And you've been doing that your entire life. So in one of our conversations, you told me about how you got married at a really young age. What led to that? So I kind of want you to tell our listeners more about how that process was. So why did you get married at that age? How were you feeling? And as an adult, talk through kind of how you've been able to work through some of the trauma or some of the pain that's left you with.
Okay, I was born in 1944, and when I was 11 years old, my older sister was 17 years old, and we had our cousins overseas, Ibrahim and Ali, my father's nephews. Mm-hmm. So his sister Jamil's two boys. They had been in communication, but of course they didn't tell us back then. When letters would come from overseas, it's not like today you talk on the telephone. Back then you got a letter and everybody better be quiet. Because, man, if you didn't be quiet, you were in big trouble, man. And they read the letter, but which I didn't know at the time. Arabic is a written language. It's not a spoken language. Mm. And everything is Fusha, everything is it's proper. So you only would understand maybe every 3 words, okay? So anyway, but there was communications going on that the nephews, the boys, my father's nephews were getting older and they'd like to bring them to America. Mm-hmm. And back then, the way the laws were, people couldn't just travel from the Middle East to the United States. So they were thinking about my sister for the older one, which was Ibrahim, and myself for the younger, which was Ali. And I was 11 years old, but I don't think my parents looked at me, my age-wise. Somehow, I was very mature for my age, as far as maybe mentally. And then physically, to be honest, this is kind of... I don't think I'm any taller today than I was then. When I was in 5th grade, actually started in 4th grade, I was 5'2". Mm. I was one of the tallest kids in the class, wow. Which nowadays is ridiculous because it's nothing, but back then it was. And so anyway, back then I was about 5'2". I weighed about 120 pounds, so I was big for my age, and I don't think my folks looked at me only as an 11-year-old. Okay, so they were making plans for us to go overseas. My sister, and myself, and a younger brother. He was, at the time, he was 4 years old. And back then, we didn't have jet planes. We had the propeller planes, and the airline fares were quite expensive. So you would leave from Detroit, but there was no flights going overseas from Detroit. You went into New York, Idlewild Airport. You changed planes, so we went from American Airlines to Pan Am. I'm sorry, not Pan Am, KLM. Mm-hmm. And KLM stopped at the Netherlands at Rotterdam, and they gave you a free ride through the what do you call it, the channels or the canals. And then another flight from there went into Lebanon. And of course, when we got there, everybody's waiting. My mother's mother and she had a younger brother, was still in Lebanon, and my aunts, my father's sister, which would be Amti Ibrahim Jamili, her name. I was named after her, and then they took us in Ammi Ali, which is Sidat Ali. They took us to the American Hotel there. While we're there, they got us some food to eat. While we're there, Ali, at the time, my father's nephew, the one that they intended for me, he was 17 at the time. He was working in Beirut, so he came in to the hotel, and they introduced him. This is Ali. I looked at him, but I didn't think twice because you're at that age, you're really not mature enough to be even thinking about desires or anything like that. So anyway, so as we go on to the village, to Tibnain, nobody really said nothing. All as I know is my grandfather, my mother's father, came into a room and asked my sister and I to come with him into a room. And then there was people in the other room, and there was a sheikh there, and it was Sheikh Ali from the Berry family. And my grandfather said to us, because he did speak English, because they did live here years ago, and he told us, Jidda, whatever I say, and I ask you, just say ani wakil. I didn't even know what that meant, that I accept, So anyway, they went through this khutbah ceremony, what do you call it, which is, only thing is you consummate the marriage, and otherwise it's the same thing as getting married. So anyway, that's what took place, and I really didn't comprehend or understand most of it, and then from there the heartaches came, because even though I was young, yes, I did get attached to him. I did have feelings for Ali, and I did care about him. But when time came to come back to America, we were there like about maybe 3.5, 4 months. You had to make papers, and they would follow. Well, before we left there, we knew that the papers for my sister and for Brahim were okay, because she was 17. There wasn't a problem. We knew that he could be leaving within a short time. Mm-hmm. But for me, they disputed it because of my age. They says that this is a farce. This is just to bring him to the United States. This isn't a legal marriage. Wow. And whatever. So anyway, we came back, and my father, alhamdulillah, he had a grocery store. Because he had a grocery store, he was always involved in the city politics. He was always, whether it was, God rest his soul, Omer Hubbard giving him stuff from the store, making friends with him, with the council. Mm-hmm. Lucille McCullough, long story there, which my dad knew well. She came to the house. What's the matter, Mr. Joseph? And he told her the story, and she asked me, do you care about him? Is this legit? And I'm very shy at that age. What are you going to say to 11-year-old? It's embarrassing. And I says, yes, I do. She says, okay, then, sweetie, I'm going to help you. I want you to write me, I think she wanted like some 10 separate pages of the same letter from a whole sheet, how I felt and my feelings and whatever. There was no computer back then, no Google or nothing. Everything was done by hand. And, writing these letters was very difficult for me because they were embarrassing and very hard. And how do you express yourself with, when you don't even know the words at that age? Okay. So anyway, in between there was a lot of difficulties, because it was costing the folks money for getting attorneys and for whatever was going on. And my mother was kind of getting annoyed at the extra expense that was going on. And she would take it out on me, which kind of hurt me, because I didn't ask to be put in this position. Mm. If I needed something or that, it's okay, we spend enough money, you don't need this or that. With heartache said, sometimes don't even want to get into or talk about. But anyhow, so finally, this took place. We came back here on October 31st, 1955. So in 1957, at the time, I could quote you exactly 1 year and 2 months and something after the fact. It doesn't matter that we got to okay that they were going to accept his papers, Mm-hmm. In fact, one thing that did happen, which is kind of embarrassing, is my mother took me to the doctor, and she wanted the doctor to verify stuff that I know we put him in an embarrassing situation, and he was upset because of my age. Doctor didn't want to touch it. He didn't want to even go there. So anyway, wow. We got okay that they were going to finally allow Ali to come here. So it was February 9, 1957, that he was going to allow it to come. Meanwhile, I had a lot of feelings going on in my heart. One thing I discovered, something that you didn't know existed. I don't want to cry, but...
You're about to make me cry, too.
First time in my life that I learned what love and sacrifice really means. If you care about somebody deep enough, you care for what's best for that person rather than what's best for you. Mm-hmm. And coming back here after being in Lebanon, seeing the way the life was there, was a much laid-back life, a much better life, a much joyful life. Here, it was all work, work, work. Everything was just laid out. Get up in the morning, eat your breakfast, go to school, or go to work, work your 5 days a week, maybe have 2 days in the weekend, and nothing in between. So in some ways, I really felt that it'd be better if they didn't allow him to come, because he's not going to be happy here. That's how I really felt. But when he did come, and I was exactly right, he wasn't happy here. He didn't like the lifestyle. He didn't like the way things were here, and he did want to go back. So he said to me that, would I be willing to go back with him to Lebanon and live? And I said, okay, I don't have a problem with that. So from 1957, he worked a couple different jobs, save up money. So from 57 and 58, so in 59, we made plans to go back to Lebanon. And like I had mentioned, I don't know, maybe, that was on the other one. Anyway, airline fare back then was very expensive. So, and we're still doing propeller planes. There was no jet planes. So we decided to go by ship. So that's what we decided to do. My mother always kind of, I don't know if I even want to go there, but from the time I was born, I don't know if it was an Arabic thing, if it was my mother's thing or what, but to have girls was not something people liked. Everybody wanted to have boys. And if you had a daughter, it was like shameful. So I remember from the time that I was born that I really wasn't wanted, and my mother never hesitated to say it in front of me. Yuritek machlit, yuritek mittis, things that are ridiculous. And I can remember as an infant hearing the stuff in my ears. So anyway, all of a sudden, now my mother took a liking to me. She got very upset. She didn't want me to leave, and she started to cry. And she kind of bonded with me, and I thought it was kind of sad that it took something like this for her to realize that she did care about me. She just didn't know how to show it, But anyway, and I had one aunt, I still remember to this day, telling her, "What's wrong with you?" to my mother. Why are you acting this way for, as long as she's happy and she's well and she's going, it's not such a bad thing. So then anyway, when we left, we went to Lebanon, and when we got to the ship was getting close up. It wasn't where, like, some places the docks are so small, they can't get right up, but the ship was able to get right up there, and we could see from a distance, Ammi Sidat Lisale, we could see your tata, Imimed Fadlallah, your father's mother. We could see many of the relatives that were there. It was just unbelievable. So when we got there, they had us sit down, and the first thing they brought to us to drink is the least thing that I like in the world, which everybody loves, is 7-Up.
They thought they were treating you.
7-Up turned out to be, from the time we left Lebanon, 55 to 59, turned out to be, that was the number one drink in the country. So everybody drank 7-Up.
Wow. So one thing I want to, because just hearing the story and even imagining, the boat pull up, it's just so different from anything that we can imagine. And I think a lot of people listening, as our last question, I want to ask you, what would you say about what you were able to witness about how our parents came here? So maybe just give us a quick, story to tell us about the perspective of you witnessing the influx of immigrants and Arab coming to America, our parents' generation.
Okay, because of the civil war going on in Lebanon, many people were migrating here, and it wasn't just a couple. It was very, very too many at one time. In fact, 1980, I was working in food services, and I was over at Fortson. And we had so many Arabic children, and they were on the free lunch program, and I was back then assisting cooking, which was hard enough, and we did our own cleaning. But the manager come and pulled me out and says, because we had 2 lunch lines, "I want you to do the lunch line on this side when the children come through, because we don't know these names and we can't deal with them, and you're going to be able to understand what these names were." and they didn't even make an effort to try to understand the names, and it would take the ladies forever. So they put me on the register on that side. And then you could have your lunch free, but cookies and anything else was extra, okay? And so the kids when the children would come through, what is your name, And to this day, I know so many of them, and I still remember them. And when I see them, I think of that.
Wow, and you see their kids.
And I'm gonna give Joe Bezzi from Biblos a little pitch here. Joe was one of the people who would come through that lunch line. And to this day, every time he sees me, in fact, I used to help at Laurie's school in the cafeteria, in the library for the new immigrants, and Joe was one of them too. He always, every time he sees me, oh, she used to feed me.
Aww, that's
she used to feed me.
That's,
to this
I think
day.
That's honestly, Jeannie, I'm so happy that we were able to bring you on. That's for selfish reasons. You are like the time capsule into our history. And I want everyone who's listening to know that people like you have seen it all. And it's not even just the fact that you've been around for longer. It's your perspective. It's your wisdom. And the stories of us and our parents are something that I definitely carry with me. So thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate you so much. Original Dearborn girl. Thank you, Jeannie.
Thank you guys for having me.